They mocked me over dinner like it was a family tradition. Still taking the bus everywhere, my brother sneered. "How's your little apartment?" he laughed, and the others joined in, even my parents. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, swallowed the burn, and waited. When they followed me outside and saw me unlock my Rolls-Royce, the laughter died mid-breath. My father's voice cracked. "That car costs more than $250K. I looked at him calm and steady. "Well, I said you should see my little apartment then." That night, for the first time, silence felt like justice. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments? Or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story reaches. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If stories like this touch you, please subscribe to the channel. It helps stories like mine find the people who need to hear them. My name is Auden Locke, and this is how I turned their laughter into silence. The parking lot glowed under the amber haze of sodium lights, the kind that make every surface look a little too honest. Warm Texas air clung to my shirt collar, carrying the faint smell of rain and exhaust from Highway 75. The valet lingered near the curb, pretending not to stare. My family stood in a half-circle behind me. My father Victor with that tired authority in his posture. My mother Lorraine smiling too brightly. My brother Mason gripping his wife's hand, and Hazel with her boyfriend's arm draped loosely around her shoulders. They looked like a portrait of control. And then there was me. We'd just finished dinner at Mason Oaks Country Club, a family gathering organized under the excuse that Aunt Bernadette, now 90, wanted to see everyone together one last time. The food had been good, the laughter practiced. Every compliment was a disguised reminder of hierarchy, Mason's new house, Hazel's art show, my silence. When the plates were cleared, I could almost hear the ticking clock of patience. As we stepped into the parking lot, Mason smirked. Still taking the bus man. His voice dripped with amusement. Hazel joined in, pretending innocence. "How's your little apartment, Auden?" Their laughter was soft but sharp, cutting through the night air. I didn't answer. I let the quiet stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. Then I reached into my pocket thumb, brushing the smooth edge of my key fob, and pressed. The Rolls-Royce Spectre blinked to life, silver paint catching the lamplight, the LED trim outlining every inch like a whispered confession. Silence spread like a ripple. My father's head tilted, eyes narrowing as if his brain needed to translate what his eyes refused to believe. That car costs over $250,000. I looked at him, calm, steady, detached. "Well, I said you should see my little apartment then." No one spoke. Even the valet looked frozen. I opened the door, the scent of leather slipping into the air, and the hum of the electric engine broke the last thread of disbelief. Their reflections shimmered on the car's surface, 7 stunned faces trapped in their own history. When I reversed out, the tires whispered against the concrete, almost gentle. But the sound carried a finality, words never could. Through the mirror, I caught their still figures' mouths slightly open, framed by the glow of the club sign. My phone buzzed in the console, 3 missed calls, one from my father, one from my mother, one from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring. 3 years earlier, I had stood in a different parking lot holding a bus pass and 2 torn suitcases. That was the last night I believed in fairness. To understand this one, the silence, the car, the calm, you have to know where it started. I used to think invisibility was a curse. Now I know it's training. You learn how to see in the dark when no one ever turns on the light for you. I pressed harder on the gas, watching the lights fade behind me. "I once learned to disappear to survive," I murmured to myself. "But being unseen doesn't mean you don't exist." The house on Sycamore Street never changed. Even years later, I can still smell the lemon polish my mother used on the old oak furniture, hear the ceiling fan clicking like it was counting down to something inevitable. The walls were lined with proof of perfection, Mason's football photos framed in gold, Hazel's newspaper feature about her first art show. Every piece screamed pride. None of it had my name. I was 16 when I brought home the letter announcing I'd won first place in the Texas State Math Olympiad. I remember the thrill shaking through my hands as I walked into the living room. Lorraine was folding Hazel's laundry, the TV humming softly. "Mom," I said, almost breathless, "I won. First place in the entire state." She looked up, smiled without looking. "That's nice, honey. Could you help Hazel with her algebra homework later?" And just like that, it was over. The next day, Mason came home to a new pickup truck, a graduation gift for his hard work. Hazel was given a rented studio downtown to explore her creativity. I asked for a new laptop because the one Mason had passed down was missing keys and the battery wouldn't hold charge. My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Mason's old one still works. Use that. You don't need anything fancy for numbers." That evening, I went to my room, closed the door, and pulled my trophy from the paper bag. The gold plating caught the last of the sunset sneaking through the blinds. I ran my finger over the engraving, Auden Locke first place, Texas State Mathematics Competition. I waited for pride to come. It didn't. It just sat there heavy and hollow. In the living room, they laughed over dinner plans. I sat in silence, listening to the clink of forks and plates, the sound of belonging happening somewhere I wasn't invited. I opened the bottom drawer of the oak cabinet in my room and placed the trophy inside. The drawer creaked hinges, rusted and stubborn. It groaned like something trapped inside it. I remember thinking, maybe recognition sounds like that, a voice you can't quite set free. Later that night, I noticed a card sticking out from Hazel's pile of art supplies. A congratulatory note from Aunt Lillian, a neat cursive scrawl, and a crisp $50 bill tucked inside. I'd never met her properly. She lived in Fort Worth, successful, unmarried, the relative no one mentioned much. But she had written, "Keep creating, the world notices when you do good things." For a moment, I wondered if she even knew I existed. Maybe not. Or maybe she was the only one who did. The next morning, my father tossed me Mason's old jacket. "Still good," he said. It hung 2 sizes too big, smelling faintly of engine grease. The sleeves swallowed my hands. Hazel laughed, called it vintage. I smiled back like it didn't matter. Inside, I made a quiet promise. One day, I'll walk out of this house wearing something that actually fits who I am. That summer, the heat pressed against the windows, cicadas screaming from the trees. I'd study late into the night under a flickering bulb, the same trophy sitting on the dresser, now coated in dust. I didn't wipe it off anymore. It wasn't worth the energy to polish something no one else could see. But that sound, the squeal of the drawer's hinge every time I opened it, stayed with me. It whispered, "Someday you'll open it again, and they'll have to look." And maybe that's what survival looked like for me back then. Not rebellion, just endurance. Not loud, but steady. The day I left for college, I ran my fingers over the drawer's handle one last time. The dust came away on my skin like a quiet signature. I looked around the room, the posters, the peeling paint, the space I'd outgrown, and whispered to the walls, "I'll leave by my own 2 feet." As I packed, I slipped that forgotten card from Aunt Lillian into my wallet. Her name, inked in blue, curled like a thread of light through the dark. Maybe I thought to be seen, you just have to stand where the light is. And that was the beginning of everything I was about to become. Senior year felt like a waiting room I couldn't escape. Every day in that Plano house carried the same rhythm, my father's coffee brewing before sunrise, my mother humming while folding Hazel's clothes, Mason dropping car keys on the counter like trophies. I kept to my corner, my space marked by a desk stacked with scholarship brochures, application forms, and the cracked calculator that had survived 2 semesters longer than it should. When the acceptance letter from UT Austin arrived, my hands trembled before I even opened it. I knew the weight it carried, not just an opportunity, but a chance to leave this place that never saw me. 70% covered. That was the headline. The rest of the math came like a slap. 30% still missing, plus books, room, and food. I made a spreadsheet that night, red numbers bleeding across the screen like warnings. At dinner, my parents called for a family talk. My father's tone was calm, rehearsed, the kind of tone he used to deliver bad news that he thought sounded reasonable. "Auden," he began, "you know, we've put 3 kids through college. We're proud of that. But there's only so much we can do. You'll need to figure out the rest. My mother chimed in, smiling that polite, distant smile. You're smart, honey. You'll find a way. Maybe it's time you learn independence. I just nodded. I'd learned long ago that arguing only made the silence afterward colder. That night I stayed late at the deli. The fluorescent lights buzzed, the smell of bread and onions hung in the air, and Gus the manager was counting cash drawers. You look like you're carrying more than sandwiches, kid, he said. I smiled thinly and kept wiping the counter. Back home, I stared at my phone for a long time before dialing. The back cover was cracked. The battery barely held charge. When Aunt Lillian's voice answered, steady and warm, I almost hung up. Aunt Lillian, I said quietly, I need to ask for help. Not charity. Just a loan. I got a 70% scholarship. I'll pay you back every cent. There was a pause long enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. Then she said, I'm not giving you money, Auden. I'm investing in you. The only condition is that you never stop halfway. 2 days later, I took a bus to Fort Worth. Her home smelled like cedar and jasmine, everything in its place. She handed me a folder, thin and crisp, with a simple note. Pay back when you can. Success is the only interest I want. Before I left, she looked me straight in the eyes. Don't go back asking for their approval. Build your own. When I returned to Plano, the driveway was filled with laughter. My father was standing next to a brand new Dodge Charger, his hand on Mason's shoulder. You earned it, son, he said, handing him the keys. I stood near the steps, clutching the folder in my hand. What about your old car? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I could use it for campus. Mason chuckled. I'm selling it. Need the deposit for my apartment. You can take the bus like everyone else. My father nodded approvingly. The bus will build character, son. You'll thank me one day. I looked past them to the distant corner of the street where the evening bus hissed to a stop. Its headlights flickered through the trees like a quiet invitation. Maybe I will, I said softly. That night I slipped my first bus ticket into my wallet and sealed it in a clear plastic sleeve. A contract with myself. Someday I wouldn't need it. But I'd never forget what it taught me. Before I left, Aunt Lillian called. Her tone was calm, but edged with something I hadn't heard before. Do you know, she said, that years ago I offered to pay for your summer math program. Your father refused. He said, the boy needs to learn to struggle. I froze, the air knocked out of me. He didn't want you to fail, Auden, she added quietly. He just never wanted you to outgrow him. That night I couldn't sleep. The walls of my room felt closer than ever. I packed my bag before sunrise, folded the cracked laptop inside, and took one last look at the dusty trophy on my dresser. I whispered, if validation is a door, I'll forge my own key. At 5 a.m., I boarded the first bus out of Plano. The driver nodded. I pressed my forehead to the window, watching the neighborhood fade into the distance. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was running away. I was finally moving towards something. Austin smelled like coffee, asphalt, and second chances. My dorm in East Riverside was small, the kind of place where the walls held your secrets because there was nowhere else to put them. I worked mornings at Bean and Barrel, a cafe just off campus, and attended afternoon classes in finance. Most nights I studied until my eyes burned, the old laptop humming like it was barely holding itself together. My day started at 4:30 a.m. every morning. The first bus screeched down the hill, half empty, its windows fogged with the breath of night shift workers. I'd ride in silence, reviewing formulas under the dim light of my phone. At the cafe, I'd unlock the doors, start the grinders, and wipe the counters. Gus, the manager, would arrive right after sunrise, his baseball cap pulled low, his smile faint but kind. You've got that hunger, kid, he said one morning, watching me scribble notes between orders. Don't ever lose it. The world's full of full bellies and empty souls. I liked Gus. He never asked why I worked so hard or where I came from. He just noticed. Sometimes noticing is everything. Classes were hard. Finance wasn't just numbers, it was language, and I had to teach myself how to speak it fluently. Ethan, my classmate, lived in a high-rise dorm and drove to lectures in a Tesla. I rode 2 buses and sometimes walked home when they stopped running. But I never felt behind. Every dollar I earned at the cafe went into a small envelope labeled next semester. One night a thunderstorm hit just as my last bus broke down near the bridge over the Colorado River. Rain soaked through my jacket, my shoes squelched with each step, and lightning flashed across the skyline. By the time I reached the dorm 3 miles later, I was drenched but laughing. My reflection in the glass door looked like a ghost that refused to disappear. By midterm, I had the highest grade in my class. My professor called me in after the exam. "You ever think about investment management, Locke? I'm recommending you for a summer internship." I thanked him, called home to share the news. My father answered. "Good," he said. "Keep your GPA up." That was all. The line went quiet, then the click of disconnection. Weeks passed. The cafe became my second home. Gus kept an eye on me like a quiet guardian, making sure I ate, telling me old stories about his wife who used to paint sunsets she never sold. Then one Friday, he didn't show up. The next morning, the owner told us he'd had a stroke. The shop closed for 2 weeks. I went to the hospital, but visitors weren't allowed. They said he'd left a note for me. It was short, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "You're gonna outgrow this place. Promise me you'll never forget where you started." I folded that note into my wallet next to the bus ticket. It felt like a map, one that didn't show where I was going, only how not to get lost. When the cafe reopened, I picked up extra shifts to cover Gus's absence. My classes grew harder, my sleep shorter, but something inside me stayed sharp, almost peaceful. Pain becomes quieter when it turns into purpose. One evening after a long day, I scrolled through social media. Hazel's face filled the screen, smiling in front of her art studio, an article headline bragging, "Local artist's parents invest in her dream." My chest tightened, but I didn't cry. I just stared for a long moment, then closed the app. I'd already learned that some people's love comes with receipts. Later that night, I sat by my window, the lights of Austin flickering in the distance. My math trophy, the one I'd brought from Plano, leaned slightly on the shelf. The rain outside tapped against the glass and the wind nudged it, tilting it further. I reached out, straightened it, wiped a thin layer of dust from its edge. The bus ticket in my wallet had a torn corner, now worn from being handled too many times. I smiled at it, realizing how far it had taken me without moving an inch. I turned off the lamp, lay back on my bed, and whispered into the dark. Maybe they'll never see me. But for the first time, I finally see myself. The house on Sycamore Street glowed like a memory that refused to die. It had been 2 years since I'd last walked through its door. Plano's air was cold and sharp that Thanksgiving night, the kind that made every porch light seem lonelier than it should. I stood at the gate holding a store-bought pie, the paper box slightly crushed from the bus ride, my reflection flickering in the glass door. When my mother opened it, her surprise didn't reach her eyes. "Auden," she stammered, "we weren't expecting you." I smiled. I brought pie. The living room was the same gold light-polished furniture, laughter stitched together like a performance. Mason stood near the fireplace telling a story about the house he'd just bought. Hazel, radiant in a new dress, described her upcoming art exhibition in Dallas. Their words filled the room. I was just the echo between them. I sat at the end of the table, the smell of roasted turkey thick in the air. My mother poured wine for everyone except me, said it was already enough for now. They didn't ask how I'd been. They didn't ask where I lived or what I did. It was as if I'd wandered in from the cold and they were waiting for me to remember my place. I listened to their conversation about interest rates and mortgage payments, their laughter stretching like a polished surface you couldn't see through. The only sound I made was the clink of my fork against porcelain. At one point, Mason leaned over, voice dripping with amusement. Still taking the bus everywhere, Hazel laughed, resting her chin on her hand. "How's your little apartment?" The room erupted in light chuckles. I swallowed the bitterness and smiled. "It's good," I said quietly. "At least it's mine." The laughter faltered for a second, then resumed. I went back to eating. Every bite tasted like cardboard. Dinner ended slowly. My mother announced coffee, her tone bright again. I stood and excused myself. The air in the hallway was cooler, still carrying the faint scent of cinnamon. As I reached for my coat, a thin hand caught my wrist. It was Great Aunt Bernadette, frail but clear-eyed. "Don't let them touch you," she whispered. People like them only know the price of things, not the value. Her fingers were cold but steady. For a second, I forgot to breathe. When I turned toward the door, something on the bookshelf caught my eye, my old math trophy half hidden behind framed photos of Mason's wedding and Hazel's studio. Dust covered the gold plate like a fog. I picked it up and felt the weight of it heavier than I remembered. No one noticed. I slipped it into my bag. I wasn't stealing. I was reclaiming what was left of me. Outside, the night was black and still. Through the window, I saw my father laugh at something Mason said, head tilted back, mouth wide. As I walked down the driveway, their voices blurred into the hum of the street. Then faintly I heard him say, "The boy won't get far. He's good at surviving, not living." I stopped, fingers tightening around the trophy's handle. I didn't look back. The bus arrived a few minutes later, its brakes hissing like a sigh. I sat by the window watching the house shrink behind me, its lights fading into the dark. Rain began to fall, streaking the glass. My reflection looked older than I remembered, sharper. "Next time they call," I murmured, "it won't be to laugh. It'll be to ask." 3 years can change the shape of a man. I was 30 now, living 40 stories above Austin in the Independent, where the city looked like a sea of quiet lights. Every morning I drank my coffee while the sun came up behind the skyline, and I thought about how small the world used to feel. I worked at Goldman Sachs in Dallas, managing portfolios worth more than everything my family had ever owned. On my desk sat 2 things that didn't belong to that world: a bus ticket sealed in plastic and a math trophy, its nameplate now polished clean. The day I got promoted, my team clapped champagne, popped, and I smiled for photos I didn't care about. That night I drove home in silence, the hum of the Rolls-Royce filling the air. My phone buzzed against the console. The screen lit up. Mom calling. 3 years. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello, Mom. Auden, your great-aunt Bertie, is visiting," she said quickly, as if she'd been rehearsing it. "The whole family's coming to dinner Saturday. She specifically asked to see you. It's important. Don't embarrass us." Her words pressed like old fingerprints against a healed scar. I said, "I'm busy that weekend." "You can't be too busy for family," she replied, sharper now. "Your father expects you." When the call ended, I sat in the dark for a long time, the city flickering through the windshield. The same people who had erased me now wanted me back because someone else was watching. I could have ignored it. But part of me wanted to walk into that house, not to belong, but to be seen. Later that evening, I called Aunt Lillian. She listened quietly while I told her about the dinner. "You're not going there to prove anything," she said. "You've already won." "I'm not going to win," I replied. "I just want them to look at me and realize what they threw away." She sighed softly. "Then walk in tall Auden. Don't carry their ghosts with you." The next morning brought news that hit harder than I expected. Gus had passed away. A coworker from the cafe emailed me the obituary. There was a photo, his cap tilted forward, that same grin. The world felt smaller again. In his will, they said he left a note for a few of us who'd worked for him. Mine read, "You did it, kid. Remember where you started, and you'll never lose where you're going." I sat at my desk, staring at the words. For the first time in years, I closed my eyes and let myself feel the weight of gratitude. Preparing for Plano felt strange. I packed a black suit, simple and sharp, and slid the bus ticket and Gus's note into my wallet. Before leaving the office, I opened a file on my computer and paused at the screen. It was a bank report Victor Locke, my father, listed under delinquent mortgage notices, 3 payments behind. The house on Sycamore Street was slipping through his fingers. I didn't know whether to feel pity or symmetry. That night, as I walked through the Goldman Sachs parking garage, a valet jogged up to me. "Sir, your Rolls-Royce is ready," he said, mistaking me for a client. For a moment, I almost corrected him. Then I realized he wasn't wrong anymore. Driving home, the city lights moved across the car's polished hood like lines of poetry. I thought of the house I grew up in, of the dust on my trophy, the laughter at that dinner table. The irony was almost poetic. They taught me to endure. They never taught me what to do when endurance turned into success. I parked in my garage, turned off the engine, and let the silence settle. Outside, the wind swept through the streets, soft and distant. My reflection stared back from the dark window, calm and unshaken. "I'm not going back to be forgiven," I said quietly. "I'm going back to end the sentence they started." The following morning, I left Austin before dawn. The road stretched out ahead, empty and silver under the rising light. As I crossed into Plano, the city signs flickered past like ghosts of old chapters. The last time they saw me, I carried a bus pass and a suitcase that barely closed. This time I carried a name they couldn't ignore. When I pulled up outside the house on Sycamore Street, the reflection of the Rolls-Royce glimmered across the windows. Inside, I could see silhouettes moving around the dining table, laughter spilling through the glass. I killed the engine, took a breath, and whispered, "Let's finish this." And then I walked toward the door. I didn't knock on the old front door. The dinner wasn't at the house. It was at Mason Oaks, like the message had said. I circled the block, once let the engine cool inside the garage, then headed for the country club where the lights always looked like they were welcoming someone else. I arrived 10 minutes late on purpose. The host led me through a hush of white linen and polished cutlery until the family came into view. Victor at one end, Lorraine beside him, Mason and his wife mid-laugh. Hazel poised like a museum piece, Aunt Lillian steady and composed, and Great Aunt Bernadette small and bright-eyed in her chair like a candle no one could blow out. "Auden, there you are," Victor said, standing with the smile of a man who prefers an audience. "We were waiting for you." I shook Bertie's hand first. Her fingers were thin but warm. "Been a while, child," she said, inspecting my face. "You look like you stopped asking permission." I took the seat at the far end directly across from Victor. It felt accidental. It wasn't. The server poured water, set bread, retreated. Conversation turned on like a switch. Mason talked about his new build in Frisco square footage and interest rates tumbling out of him. Hazel announced an invitation to show work in Santa Fe, her voice stretched with practiced humility. Lorraine nodded, proud and glowing, and Victor kept saying, "Our kids are doing very well." I smiled when they looked my way and let silence do the work of a second language. Midway through the entree, Bertie cut through the chatter. "I've heard so much about Mason and Hazel," she said, spoon pausing over her soup. "What about you, Auden? Where have you landed?" The table slowed. I set down my glass. "Dallas," I said. "I manage an investment group at Goldman Sachs." The room tightened. Knives quieted. Lorraine found her voice first. "Oh, she managed, that's impressive." Bertie leaned back satisfied. "I thought so," she said, eyes soft. "Your eyes don't beg anymore." Mason cleared his throat and grinned. "Sounds big," he said, leaning forward. "Still in that tiny apartment, though. Minimalist, right? Austin loves that." I let out a small laugh. "Minimalist," I said, with a view 40 floors up over Lady Bird Lake. Hazel blinked, calculating whether to congratulate me or pretend she hadn't heard. Bertie wasn't done. "Do you still keep that math trophy?" she asked. "You were always the one who did the work." No one applauded. I nodded. "It sits on my desk," I said, "right between two files worth more than this room." Victor's gaze dipped. Lorraine pressed her napkin to her lips. The old story of that house on Sycamore Street pressed into the space between us like a fingerprint. Dessert came and went. I stood first, thanked Bertie for insisting on the dinner, and told the table I had an early morning. Lorraine rose quickly. "We'll walk you out," she said, too bright. Everyone followed a small parade of faces that had once watched me pass with bus schedules and borrowed jackets. The night air was cooler than I expected. Mason stepped beside me, whispering just loud enough. "Still taking the bus, man." He laughed at his own line like it was tradition. I didn't answer. I pressed the fob. The specter woke in a ribbon of light LED tracing the body like a signature. The chrome caught 7 reflections and turned them into one pale blur. My father found his voice. "That car," he said, throat-catching, "that car costs more than $250,000. I opened the door, the leather easing a breath into the night. "Well," I said, meeting his eyes, "you should see my little apartment then." I sat, closed the door, and the world outside went quiet, as if the glass had been waiting years to decide which sounds were worth hearing. In the rear view, they looked like a painting someone had hung crooked. On the drive home, I replayed the dinner with no edits. How they filled the room with noise and how a few clean facts rearranged it. How Bertie saw me and made them see me. How silence had always been my weapon of choice. By morning, the calls started. First Mom, then Dad, then Mason, then Hazel. I let the phone tremble across the counter while I made coffee. It kept going. It would keep going. They had needed 3 years to say nothing and only one night to remember my number. I took a sip, watched the steam drift, and finally picked up. "Meet us," my mother asked. "Just for a few minutes. We want to talk." I looked at the bus ticket in my wallet at the polished edge of the trophy on my desk and said, "Across the street from my office. Blue Mesa. 30 minutes. I arrived 5 minutes late on purpose." They were waiting beside my car in the garage posture, careful smiles buffered. Lorraine linked her hands together like she was about to pray. Victor stood half a pace back, eyes on the floor, and then quickly up again. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. "We just want to talk." I nodded toward the street. "Inside," I said. "Not here." Blue Mesa was bright with winter light, the kind that makes everything look honest, whether it wants to be or not. We took a corner table. I ordered black coffee. They ordered what polite people order when they want something lattes, extra warm. We sat in a triangle of silence until my mother began. "We're proud of you," she said. "We haven't said that enough." My father added, "People make mistakes. Families figure it out." I stirred the coffee slow circles. "What are we figuring out?" I asked. My father set his cup down like it weighed more than porcelain. "Mason's getting married," he said. "Hazel's planning hers too. Weddings are expensive. If you contributed a bit, it would bring everyone closer. It'd show you care." The room got very quiet, the kind of quiet that asks you who you are. I looked at them both and smiled without warmth. "So I buy my way back," I said. Lorraine shook her head quickly. No, she said. "Just, support. Family support." I let the silence stretch until I felt it pull. "Do you remember Thanksgiving?" I asked. "When I brought a pie and sat at the end of your table and no one asked me a single thing. Do you remember the joke about my apartment?" My father's mouth tightened. My mother's eyes glassed. "We were wrong," she said. "We can do better." I reached for my wallet, slid a card across the table, then pulled it back and set it on my side. "This is my personal investment account," I said. "It cleared 7 figures last quarter. None of it is for you. I'm opening a scholarship instead. It'll be named after Gus, the man who let me study behind a coffee counter and told me I'd outgrow that place." Lorraine blinked. "Who is Gus?" "Someone who treated me like a person," I said, "when my own family treated me like a problem to be managed." I placed a small plastic sleeve on the table. Inside it, the first bus ticket I'd ever kept. The edges were soft from years of moving with me. "This cost less than any gift you ever gave my siblings," I said, "but it carried me farther than any of them ever went for me. It taught me that love is not always free and I'm done paying for it." I stood. My father inhaled as if to speak, then exhaled nothing. My mother reached for my hand and found only the reflection of the window. I dropped enough cash to cover all 3 cups. "I'm not angry," I said. "Anger is a leash. I'm not wearing leashes anymore." Outside, the air bit clean against my face. The rolls sat quiet and sure paint, catching the pale sun. I slid behind the wheel, touched the bus ticket one last time, then tucked it back where it belonged. As I pulled onto the road, the city opened in front of me like a page that finally understood its own story. On the ramp to I-35, the skyline of Dallas folded into the mirror, and Austin's horizon tugged me forward. Aunt Lillian's message buzzed on my phone when I stopped for gas an hour later. "You did right. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's ending the payments." I smiled without needing to. They taught me the price of everything. I taught myself the value of one thing myself. I didn't win by shouting. I won by leaving the door unlocked and walking through it. I set the cruise, let the engine settle, and watched the road unfurl like it had been waiting for me since the day I folded that first ticket into plastic. I wasn't returning anything. I was redeeming myself. and the only sound I needed now was the quiet that follows a finished sentence. Sometimes walking away isn't revenge, it's recovery. When you stop chasing approval, you finally meet yourself. If this story made you feel something, drop a simple hi or tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know you're here listening. And if you believe in quiet strength and second chances, don't forget to subscribe. Our stories are just getting started.